Hello, and thank you for downloading Witness from the BBC World Service. It's 45 years since a television drama shocked Britain and put homelessness on the national agenda. Neil Rozelle looks back at the first screening of Cathy Come Home.
It's Wednesday, November 16th, 1966. Some 12 million Britons, a full quarter of the population, are in front of their black and white televisions, unwittingly about to watch a bit of history unfold. They see a woman by the side of a busy road. She's young. She chews her fingers while she waits. Finally, a truck stops and she climbs in. Then we hear her voice.
Well, I was a bit fed up, you know. There didn't seem to be much there for me. You know how these little towns are. One coffee bar. It was closed on a Sunday. Didn't even tell them I was going. I sent him a card when I got down there.
Down there is London. The woman is Cathy. And the film is Cathy Come Home, a drama that blends fiction with some startling facts.
There's 200,000 more families in the London area than there are homes to put them. And in addition, there's 60,000 single persons living without sinks or stoves.
German bombs destroyed or damaged 1/3 of London's homes in the Second World War. The city was slow to rebuild. But the problem received little attention. Initially, Cathy looks set to avoid any trouble. She gets a job and meets a driver, Reg. They fall in love, marry, and, based on their 2 salaries, move into a modern apartment.
Oh, what a place. Parquet flooring, tin openers fixed to the wall, double glazing. And the neighbours, talk about stylish.
It's a hopeful start, cheered by the arrival of their first child. Then, Reg gets hurt in an accident at work. He loses his job and gets no compensation. And with Cathy off work with the baby, they can no longer afford their nice apartment. It's the beginning of a relentless decline that takes them through an increasingly bleak procession of shared accommodation, caravans, shelters, and finally, the street.
The response was pretty extraordinary.
Ken Loach directed Cathy Come Home.
It's a film that shows the disintegration of a family because they have nowhere to live. First, the husband isn't allowed to stay with the wife and children, and then finally the children are taken away because they're on the streets. And people were outraged that this could happen, and it was happening.
The film was a sensation. Viewers flooded the BBC with calls. The morning after, the venerable Times of London said,
"Few can have watched Cathy Come Home, last night's Wednesday play on BBC One, without being deeply moved by compassion or anger, even by disbelief. It was the evident purpose of Jeremy Sanford, a dedicated young author, to shock by giving dramatic form to a serious indictment of housing conditions in London and other big cities, in which thousands of people are losing hope of ever making a home of their own."
I was living in a poor part of London, and a neighbour of mine was evicted, and it was to go and see her that I first arrived at the dumping ground for all the homeless families in South London.
Jeremy Sanford wrote Cathy Come Home.
What I saw there completely appalled me. Room after room was crammed with pathetic homeless families. If they were unable to find somewhere to go, then the children were taken away into care, and at that time it was happening to about 4,000 children a year were going into care for reasons only of homelessness. So appalled was I by all this that I felt that the public must be made acquainted with what was going on.
He succeeded. One commentator called it an ice pick in the brain of all who saw it. In addition to the editorial in the Times, the programme was raised in Parliament. Anthony Greenwood was then Minister for Housing.
One of the delegates referred very properly this afternoon to the programme Cathy Come Home. I welcome that programme, because the more that the conscience of our people is shaken by programs of that kind, the easier my job is going to be.
Beyond the compelling story, why was Cathy Come Home so powerful? The Times hinted in its editorial.
Television, with its mass audience and searching camera, can perhaps be a more powerful medium than any to force people to see the truth.
Ken Loach.
Television was very new then, so the audience that was watching it hadn't grown up with it. So it had a much greater ability to make an impact. There were also only 2.5 channels, so you didn't have the button to zap from programme to programme. So it was much easier to make an impact.
But Ken Loach is being modest. He can surely take some credit. He was a 30-year-old director trying something new. Remember, it's 1966. Most television drama till then had been filmed in a studio. With Cathy Come Home, Ken Loach took it to the street, filming very quickly using techniques from news and documentary. Many scenes are unrehearsed, giving it all a very spontaneous feel, as in the scene where a caravan in the park where Cathy is living catches fire.
All shots like this, it's done in not much longer than it takes to see it. We set it on fire and then just confronted the people with it. The cameraman does very well because the event happened like a documentary event, like it would happen in real life, and he had to cover it like a documentary cameraman where everything just happened once, and if you missed it, you missed it. The idea is that it should have an unpremeditated quality, and the out-of-focus shots, the smudges, the little pieces of footage that have just flashed to the camera, in a way give it, I think, a sense of movement and energy that if it were more premeditated, wouldn't have.
Cathy Come Home does feel very real. The story goes that for years after the film, people would come up to the actress who played Cathy, Carol White, and press money into her hands. They thought she really was homeless.
She was very compelling, as was Ray, her husband, and they were very compelling. And the kids in the film were Carol's children. So you did sense a real bond between them, which is quite rare in films.
This clear bond makes the end of the film hard to watch. Cathy receives a typewritten notice.
It must be clearly understood that the temporary accommodation will no longer be available after that date. What does it mean?
I shouldn't worry about it. Doesn't mean what it says, maybe.
But it does, and Cathy and the children must again look for a place to live.
Oh, excuse me, I called about a room.
How many have you?
Well, there's just me and the two kiddies.
Sorry, I don't take children.
Finally, Cathy and the two children end up on a railway platform at night. The camera is at a distance and captures two men and two women approaching from behind.
You're not having my kids! You're not having...
Did Carol know that her children would be taken away in that last scene?
No, I don't think she did. She knew something was up, obviously, because she was just sitting on a bench in a station. We filmed it with a hidden camera, because it's not only the taking of the children, but also the response of passers-by.
The passers-by did nothing, and despite the grand words and popular debate raised by the film, Ken Loach is pessimistic about what it really achieved.
In retrospect, it didn't change much at all. It had a legal effect at the time, was that they stopped separating families. They accepted there was an obligation to house fathers as well as mothers and children. So that stopped families being broken up immediately. But the effects of homelessness and the effects of bad housing are with us and are now worse than ever.
There are charities that try to deal with these problems. One of them, Shelter, was launched in the days following the first broadcast of Cathy Come Home. Some at the time saw conspiracy between the charity and the BBC. But the former director of Shelter, Adam Sampson, says that's wrong.
Shelter was not born out of Cathy Come Home. Shelter was planned anyway. But Shelter was launched within days of Cathy Come Home being shown and immediately tapped into the public consciousness because of Cathy Come Home. And all the work that Shelter has done and is doing would not have been possible without Cathy Come Home.
So after more than 4 decades, Cathy Come Home has had some lasting effect. One wonders how many television dramas today will be able to say the same thing.
Neil Rozelle. For details of our complete range of downloads and our terms of use, go to bbcworldservice.com/podcasts.